But yeah, I'm in Nevada now. I'm one state closer to you, brother. But yeah, I recently moved from the Bay Area to the Reno, Nevada area, and I'm loving it so far. Um, I was gonna talk this week about why I moved, and I wanted to do it on my platform. And then thank you for being a part of it with me, Harrison. We're kind of
Yeah.
transitioning over here. Um, and let's start with this. You said you had a couple questions for me. I think a lot
Yeah.
of my stuff is pretty obvious, and maybe it could be answered by some of your questions anyway. So go ahead, ask me those questions, brother.
All right. So I have a couple just like weird questions here and there.
Yeah, fun.
So the way I look at it is you've had like four major moves in your life, right? Purcell to Norman, Norman to Shawnee, Oklahoma to California, and now California to Nevada. If that's
That's
fair to say.
That's fair to say. Yeah, the Priscilla Norman when I was so young, but I guess maybe that makes it even more of important because your formative years. So yeah, I think that's perfectly fair to sum up.
So out of those four moves, where would this one rank as far as uh, actually making the move? Like, because moving sucks. Like, it always sucks. You know what I mean? Because it's stressful. Where
Yeah,
was the stress on this out of those four?
it was this weird balance. It kind of relates to fighting in a way, right? It's like the more experience a fighter has, that's good, but it also means like he probably is less athletic. It's like a trade off, right? So it's like
Right.
there was, in one hand, it was way less stressful because it was almost like this ain't my first rodeo. Like, it's not even my first interstate move. It's not my first big move. It's not even me and Nina's first move together. So there was a lot of like not being like worried about the logistics of it because like it's just like that confidence that comes from experience. But on the flip side, this was probably the biggest leap of faith as far as like we don't have anybody out here, any safety net, no aunts I can stay with, nobody, not even any friends. Like literally, like we're out here like alone, and it was fully our decision to do this. Like it wasn't like I went to Shawnee because like I had to go to OBU or even when I first moved to Cali, I didn't really have another option. Like it was kind of a choice, but it's like if you have one option, is it really a choice? And so it's like
Yeah, true. True, true.
so this was a full decision that like that, which means if it goes south, like I have to like eat my shit because like nobody told y'all to go out there. You didn't have to do all that. It was kind of I guess an unnecessary risk, but also like no risk, no reward. So yeah, there was like this weird on one half of my brain was like less stress and had confidence because like I said, the whole not my first rodeo, and then on the other half I this was like fully squarely on my shoulders, and Nina was down too, but it was still essentially I would feel like I was like the driving force behind us coming out here, you know. So yeah, like I just felt like on one hand a level of confidence, and on the other hand a whole nother level of pressure.
Yeah, okay. I can imagine. I can imagine. So with that, like what was the worst part of the move itself? Like while you're actually driving and stuff. I guess probably the hotel situation you came across.
Oh yeah, so man, and this is something I guess anybody can learn from. I learned it the hard way. If you book a hotel and like even if it's weeks in advance or whatever the case may be, if you have and you don't check in by 3 a.m., they consider that a no-show. Um, and you have potential to lose your room. I Mind you, I had no fucking intention of pulling into Reno at 3 a.m. As you can imagine, a few things went behind schedule. A few things took longer than I thought. A few more extra stops you don't factor in. When you're moving, essentially things that can go wrong will go wrong. I thought it was, I completely over or underestimated the amount of time everything was going to take. So yeah, we're rolling into Reno at like 3 a.m. I'm like literally struggling to keep my eyes open. I've had like 40 energy drinks. I'm like barely making it. And I finally pull into the hotel that I had reserved like 2 weeks in advance. And they're like, oh, you don't have a room in your name. And like, I mean, as you can imagine, my patience was so thin you could see through it. Yeah, I rolled into town. I had to pretty much beg and plead and argue and reason and show receipts and just everything you could imagine. At 4 in the morning, by the time we actually get our room key and open the door, it's like close to 5. The sun's coming up, and yeah, honestly, just or you can call advance. That's another thing. Like at midnight, I probably knew that like I wasn't gonna make it by 3. I didn't think it was gonna be an issue. I just figured I have the room till checkout time. What difference does it make? Yeah. So
Right.
save yourself the headache. If you're gonna pull into town after 3 a.m., call ahead or whatever the case may be. Don't go in there unexpected like me. That part sucked, and
That's
just
good
the
to know.
overall
Yeah.
driving at night sucked. Like I literally, by the end of it, every 30 minutes I would have to pull over. Mind you, I'm driving the big U-Haul, and I would have
Right.
to like do jumping jacks and fucking like some wind sprints because like bro, like I suck at driving at night. Like I will straight up fall asleep. Like I was like nodding off, dude. It was sketch, and like I was like swerving. Like it was like way worse than driving drunk. Like I wasn't stoned, nothing. It was way worse than driving drunk. Like I was barely keeping my shit together. So yeah, like the last hour and a half was broken up into like 30-minute chunks just so like I didn't fall asleep. Like do not drive late at night, people. Like it's dangerous. Like I didn't really have a choice. Like I had to like return the U-Haul by noon the next day and meet my landlord for keys the next morning. But it fucking sucked. Like I would rather like I know it's like a bad like don't do either, but like I would much rather be like wasted driving, like way safer. Like I was such a like a threat on the road. Like seriously, it sucked.
That is so wild, man. So wild.
Yeah.
Sorry that that happened to you. Obviously, like that's terrible. Some of the other questions I had though were like, when you got to Reno, did reality meet your expectations?
Yes, yes, thankfully. And like, because there, keep in mind, people, we moved to a town that we had never stepped foot in. Like, I had been to Reno once when I was like a little kid, and I only stayed like downtown. And then, of course, we had been to Lake Tahoe, and we kind of had dinner in Truckee, which is like kind of towns on the California side. And we had spent the day in Carson City, which is like 20 miles south. But and where we're at, Sparks, Nevada, we had never stepped foot in. And there were a lot of assumptions, a lot of things we were hoping to be the way that we thought they would be. All those things, like you said, did reality meet expectations? There was a lot of question marks, but things that like I thought I had a pretty good idea of. And man, thankfully, almost everything I was like hoping for has met or exceeded expectations. Like seriously, almost
That's
everything. Like
that's perfect.
no,
I think.
seriously, there was a lot of question marks, and almost all of them turned out to be like either neutral or plus.
Hell yeah, that's
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah,
Um, I guess just the last thing I have would be like, and it's probably what you were going to touch on anyway, would be like, what inspired Reno? Like, why Reno?
yeah. Why Reno? So the main true, honest to truth answer is that it had to be somewhere. Like we needed to get out of the Bay Area to like advance our life, to level up, to move forward, to pass go and collect $200 just to keep the because San Jose, it's like it'll just keep you stagnant. And I've seen it. Like there's people, they're 40, 50 years old, they're still living with the same roommates, still going to the same bars, still working the
Really?
same type of job. Oh, it's a different kind of trap just because it's so expensive that like getting a house and starting a family is just essentially off the table. So everybody just essentially just lives like college kids or whatever kind of, young, like people live like 22-year-olds, you know what I mean? Just with a house
Yeah,
full of roommates and getting drunk all the time and all that and just like never really move on, like partly by choice, partly by I guess they feel trapped. I think more people should leave because there are people in the Bay Area that are like feeling trapped, like, oh, I want to, because like me and Nina were living in the living room of my aunt's house, which sounds
oh
weird to
shit.
probably a lot of people, but out there is like literally as normal gets. Like you will not really meet anybody that like has their own place. Like I think the only person my age I went to that had their actual own place the whole time I was in California was George Kittle.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
a
yeah, NFL
like
player, like,
no, like seriously, like I mean, you go to somebody says come over to my place, they mean come over to my room. Like
Yeah.
that's that people rent rooms, or at the very least they split an apartment with as many people as the apartment holds. You know what I mean? If it's a three
Right. Yeah.
bedroom, you're splitting that rent three ways. If it's a two bedroom, so on and so forth. So yeah, just it had to be somewhere. And Reno is, like I said, it's 4 hours from the Bay Area. And as far as other, like it was kind of just the perfect option. Then we started looking at other places that were affordable and like places that we wouldn't mind living. And this place was one of the first ones that it's affordable. One of our favorite places on earth is Lake Tahoe. We're right up the road from Lake Tahoe, and we spent a lot of time in Lake Tahoe during the pandemic. So somewhat familiar with that area, even though that area is kind of like one area over from us. It's still kind of getting closer, so we weren't completely like unfamiliar territory. And and then so like cost of living, and then there's just little things like, and then okay, so what the two things when you're moving out of state: cost of living, and then like what kind of work can I get there, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Those are pretty much the first two boxes you check. If you're moving out of state and those aren't your first two boxes, make it your first two boxes. Trust me. And but yeah, and then I looked, bro, and it's crazy. So like even financial like wizards and gurus will tell you like, well, there's two options to kind of better your financial situation. It's either to increase income or decrease outcome. And what I learned is pretty much all the jobs in the Reno area, for the most part, the good jobs, there are some shitty low paying jobs, but for the most part, it's easy to get a job that is paying Bay Area wages. So
Oh
like,
wow. Okay.
but with the like half of cost
Yeah,
of
with
living.
the expense of Reno, yes, that's already
Yeah.
better.
So that was like another thing too, because I was worried because it's like, yeah, Oklahoma's cheap, but I might make $9 an hour. You know what I mean? Like that's just like not an option. So it's
Right.
Reno is kind of having your cake and eat it too. Like the wages are essentially California wages, and there's no state tax, which makes it even more.
Wow.
So like my next job, I'm literally making the same as I did at my last job, but A, the lower cost of living, and B, the no state tax. So I'll actually take home more of my check. Um,
And still
and
a
then,
recreational marijuana state as well, Nevada.
yes, that was another huge factor, right? I definitely wanted to get somewhere not so left as the Bay Area, but I also needed somewhere that I could smoke my weed and it had good cannabis laws. Like I said, Nevada, checking box after box after box after box. Yeah, and then like for example, as far as cost of living goes, like so these rooms that I'm talking about, like say you were just moved to the Bay Area, didn't have any family, no friends, like I need a place to stay. You get on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, you're gonna find a room, like I said, not an apartment, you're gonna find a room, like I said, unless you're balling, and you're gonna find a room and it's gonna cost you on average about anywhere from like 1,000 to 1,300 a month for a bedroom in a stranger's house, and it's not going to be a big bedroom or a that dope of a house most times. And it also comes with like insanely strict rules, like stricter than high school, your parents' house and most of your high school. Like no alcohol, no music after 9. You in some of these houses, you may be paying $1,200 to rent a room where you're not allowed to use the kitchen. Like it'll have these rules. You're not allowed to use the living room. You're not like crazy. Then there's obviously the no no guests. So I mean, God forbid, you're a young dude looking to bring home somebody to hook up or whatever. Like that's out the window. Like you're essentially paying for a cell. Like
Yeah,
like
that's
you go to
crazy.
work. And that's another like big topic I wanted to hit before we get off of here is just the lowered like standard of living and expectation that comes with essentially most of California. Definitely the Bay Area. Definitely the Bay Area. I know a lot of the things I'm gonna say are correlated to the LA area as well. Like I said, the expectation, like what's the average American dream, right? To have a family, a house, maybe a yard, maybe a garage,
Maybe
you
kids,
know,
maybe a wife. That's kind of
maybe
a little
it's
different
like
now, but kind of part of it still.
exactly. And like in the Bay Area has like stripped that as like essentially a possibility for like 95% of people. And so like it's a different quality of life. Like you essentially go to your like stable, like how they had, back in the day, like the servants' quarters and shit. That's essentially what like the working class of San Jose and San Francisco, they go back and they live either in these tiny studios or they rent a room in a stranger's house, or like week to week or month to month motel rooms. Or I mean, you can't go to any city in the Bay Area and not see RVs lined up in some part of the city, just like illegal RVs, people living in RVs. It's just, and that's like not considered like bad. Like that's considered like essentially good. Like because bad is homeless. You know what I mean? So
Right,
like
right, right, right.
anything that prevents you from being homeless, like to me, like if you're a grown adult, like living on people's couches and shit, like you're homeless, right? Like you
Pretty
don't have
much.
your own. But like even that's like a level up. Like that's like an acceptable level.
Yeah, what'd you
And,
say they referred to them as? Something neighbors?
oh yeah. So then and then there's the attitude towards the homeless, right? Because like the homeless like ruin everything, garbage, crime, just dangerous drugs. I mean, call you
Yeah, the
anything.
the videos you
Yeah.
post on your Instagram stories were just wild.
And then so you think that like, okay, we can all rally together and acknowledge this is a problem in our community, right? But like at least half the people, if not more, like think you're the problem for having a problem with what they're doing. And they use this term unhoused neighbors
Yeah.
as like a kind of like, verbal gymnastics way. That's what they call homeless people. And it's like, okay, so like, because and they'll say these little catchphrases like, "Oh, you don't think the homeless people have a right to exist?" They'll say things like, and it's like, okay, so like let's use your word, right? Unhoused neighbor. If my actual neighbor, like the person that pays taxes on the property next door to mine, if they decided to take a shit on the sidewalk, would I have a problem with it? Yes. If they
Yeah.
decided to use hard drugs on the sidewalk for God and everybody to see, would I have a problem with it? Sure, yes. If they decided to sleep on the sidewalk so I couldn't walk to the store and like leave broken glass all over the sidewalk so I can't hardly walk my dog, would I have a problem with it, and would I say something to it, and would it need to stop? Yes. Do I hold myself to all of those same standards that I just listed? Also, yes.
Absolutely.
So that's what I guess the big disconnect for me is these people are supposed to be held like equality is holding everybody to the same standard. And like that's
Right.
what so many, people have fought for over the years. And is to hold everybody to the same standard. And that's essentially so you're telling me that like these people get to literally do whatever they want, like whether it's shit. You know how many homeless people I've watched jerk off when I was in the Bay? Like like
That's
super common,
terrible.
like
That's
multiple per
terrible.
month. Like multiple per month. Like just whether it be at skate parks or just downtown or in a parking garage or in
It
my own neighborhood walking my dog. I
but
mean,
like
you can't avoid it.
as bad as it is for you, man, imagine if you're like a 10 or 11-year-old girl.
Oh yeah, if you're walking with your kid, oh yeah, it's
Yeah, like
horrible.
that's
And
that's obscene. That's horrifying.
and so it's like one of those things, but it's like, oh no, they're a victim. Like, and then it's even like it's like the episode of South Park where Randy's an alcoholic and he's like, I have a disease, and like they kind of roast that whole. And I'm not saying alcoholism can't be a disease in certain scenarios, but it's that classic example of hitting your thumb with a hammer and then saying like, feel bad for me and give me money because I have a hurt thumb. It's like it's yeah. So the homeless, another gigantic reason why I left. Like and if it sounds like, oh, I've heard this before. This sounds like a lot of the same reasons why Joe Rogan and Joey Diaz and Tim Dillon and all these other, like it's not just like a podcaster thing.
Tom
Like
Segura.
there's plenty of people it's happening to. It's happening to your waitresses and your nannies and your teachers and the firefighters. It's happened. It's just podcasters have a platform to talk about it. We're all leaving for the same reasons, and and also, of course, the $40 million tax break that I received. But
Yeah.
but no, like if it sounds like, oh, he's just echoing those same talking points. Like, no, like there's a like every once in a while that does happen. Like there's talking points that kind of enter the lexicon, but or it's kind of the whole, does art imitate life or does life imitate art? And sometimes it's both. But like, there's a reason why everybody's saying the same thing and everybody's leaving California. And it's not just conjecture too, because there'd be also people who'd be like, oh, people just say they're leaving, but they don't actually leave. One last thing, whenever I was renting my U-Haul, I could barely get one. All the one-way U-Hauls leaving the
Oh
Bay
yeah.
Area were booked months in advance. Like I had to drive like a couple towns over to go pick one up. Like everybody in San Jose, all the one-way U-Hauls, all of them, like pretty much all over the Bay Area, were all. He said they weren't all. It wasn't like I just happened to pick a popular day. He said they have been booked for months and they're booked for months in advance. Like he
So it's
literally,
just a mass exodus of people.
and he used the word max exodus, not me. The U-Haul guy who actually has like logistical, like
Yeah, like he knows how many U-Hauls are getting sent one way and how many aren't. You know what
and
I mean? It's
if
his
that's
job.
common or not, or if this is an uptick. And like, yeah, he said he's never seen anything like it. So everybody, and it's crazy too, because it's like it's either kind of like the get with it or get lost, and it's like people expected California expected people to lower their standard of expectations and of what's acceptable. And they're like, oh, well, and they said, and it's kind of this attitude, well, if you don't like it, you can leave. And everybody's like, oh, okay, this is a large country with a lot of beautiful places and a lot of, better tax structures and more freedom and, more common sense. Okay, word, I will take my ball and go home. And people are
Yeah.
leaving California because there's a lot of wonderful things about California, but it's not worth just like,
The
just
day-to-day horror that you have to endure.
just degrading what you're like willing to put up with, like and then normalizing it. Like I was having the same talk. We had a friend that, shout out Coda, and we were talking to her like right one of the last days we were in town, and she was like, oh my god, you're right. And she's lived in the Bay Area her whole life. She's like, I just considered everything you just listed, I considered normal. I never even took the second to think that in other cities, like, no, this stuff isn't happening. She just like, I just thought that was just the world. And I was like, no, like where I'm at right now is so clean. Like literally the whole, you can eat something off the streets, you could. It's just in San Jose, everything's an eyesore, everything's disgusting, everything is just, yeah, it's terrible, man. But yeah,
Crazy.
fun episode, man. Thanks for being a part and being patient with my move, both listeners and you. Thanks for being a part of my first Dreadful Talk from the great state of Nevada. Like I
Yeah,
said,
thank you.
got a fun UFC card coming up next week. We gave our betting picks for, and like I said, a lot of fun just talking about why I moved to Nevada and just because it really comes from a place of just feeling bad for these California taxpayers. These people that have been in California for generations on generations on generations, much like my aunt, who my family's lived on that house on that same block since like I think the late 50s or early 60s, and just watching society collapse all around it, and still having to pay the highest property taxes, the highest income taxes, the highest state taxes in the whole nation, have the least amount of freedoms anywhere in the nation. It just, my heart goes out to those people. And like I said, I decided to take my ball and go home. I decided to stop pretending that shit was acceptable or normal or something that any self-respecting human being should have to put up with. But yeah, so follow Dreadful Talk podcast. And if you like our UFC talk, we have a whole podcast, me and Harrison, the day after every UFC card, Beefy Boys Breakdown. Go support, subscribe on YouTube, Dreadful Talk podcast, Beefy Boys Breakdown. Thanks so much for your time, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you.
You too. See you, man.
Later, brother.